Okay, perfect. So I would like to call this Coos Bay Public Schools budget meeting to order. Welcome everybody. Thank you for getting onto our online virtual meeting. I know it can be a little bit frustrating sometimes, but we appear to have just about everybody here, at least everybody we expect to show up. So the first thing, and let's see if I can do this right, is the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay. How about that one? See if that works. All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. All right. I don't know if that worked or not with the flag, but so our first order of business is to elect our budget committee officers for 2020-2021. Do I hear any nominations for the committee chair?
Adrian, can you nominate somebody that's not there?
I don't think that would be wise since they would be running this meeting. Let's see. Any nominations? Anybody? It's a really easy job.
I'll nominate Adrian.
Okay, do I hear a second for that?
Second. I'll second that.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Do I hear any other nominations?
Who was the second on that? Was that Kevin?
Yes. And then, let's see. And then, Mrs. Busselman, did you say something? I can't hear your audio very well. So I'll call again. Any other nominations for chair? Yikes. Okay. All right. Now here's kind of the awkward part when we're in a big video meeting is getting everybody to vote. So I'm going to go down our list here, and I'll call your name and let me know if you vote aye or nay, and I'll get those recorded and we'll have the tally. So for myself, I'll vote aye. Dusty.
Aye. Sorry, that's late.
Yeah, and Dusty's on kind of a delay from the rest of us. Kevin.
Aye.
David.
Aye.
Bryce.
Aye.
James.
Aye.
Addie.
Aye.
Sue.
Aye.
Rick.
Aye.
Kyle.
Aye.
And Donna.
Aye.
Well, that is unanimous. So do I hear nominations for vice chair?
I nominate James Levine as vice chair.
All right. Do I hear a second for that?
Second.
Second.
Okay. I'm sorry. Who got the second on that one? Ah, perfect.
Donna.
All right, any other nominations for vice chair? Okay, so the vice chair up is James, and I'm going to go down the list again. Myself, I vote aye. Dusty,
Aye.
Kevin,
Aye.
David,
Aye.
Bryce,
Aye.
James,
Aye.
Addie,
Aye.
Sue,
Aye.
Rick,
Aye.
Kyle,
Aye.
and Donna.
Aye.
So that is unanimous. So congratulations, James. You're vice chair. Should something happen to me during this meeting, you're the boss. All right. So our next item is the budget message from our superintendent. Take it, Brian.
Okay, I will. You should have this in your packet, but I'm going to read it, particularly the first part, because it has a lot of the legal ORSs and things in it that need to be expressed in a public meeting. So I'll read the first portion here. The formal budget process is mandated by Oregon Local Budget Law, ORS 294.391, and requires the Coos Bay School District Number 9 to develop the budget calendar, appoint budget committee members, publish a notice of budget committee meetings and public hearings, and formally approve and adopt the budget. It is the role of the budget committee to review and approve the budget document as submitted by the budget officer or as revised by the budget committee. The board of directors must conduct a public hearing prior to adopting a final budget and impose the tax rate to support the adopted budget. It is the business manager's and my responsibility to present a budget that meets the needs of students in our district and reflects the values of our community. Our projected enrollment slightly down from this year. This has occurred at all levels of our district and not focused on one grade level or building. We continue to see costs go up and funding in some areas decrease. The budget message is being delivered to the budget committee as prescribed in ORS 294.391 and is submitted to the budget committee and patrons of the Coos Bay School District. The budget message is designed to summarize and highlight points of special interest related to the budget for the 2020-2021 school year. Prior to adoption, the budget committee may recommend changes to the board of directors. As superintendent, it's my duty to provide a budget message that reflects our fiscal picture and accountability. This will be year 2 of the 2019-2021 biennium for the Oregon State budget. In year 2, we are projected to receive 51% of that 2-year budget. This balanced budget is based upon the assumption that the state school fund comes in at $9.0 billion, which was the case at the beginning of the biennium. Due to the financial impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, there is potential for some budget challenges going into next year. I will discuss those challenges later in this document. Due to the careful and wise stewardship of our resources, the Coos Bay School District is prepared to meet the challenges before us. Our budget process is collaborative and involved all stakeholders in the preparation of the proposed balanced budget being presented tonight. Our revenue assumptions: primary revenue source is the state school fund, distributed by the Oregon Department of Education. We are entering the second year of the biennium, and the Coos Bay School District is building its 1921 budget based on the following assumptions: statewide school funding of $25,557,222.68. Revenue is distributed by the state to school districts based upon the average amount per ADMW, that's average daily membership weighted. Revenue assumptions currently are being based upon calculations using an enrollment number of 3,173. which includes Lighthouse Charter School, who has an enrollment of 220, and Resource Link Charter School with an enrollment of 75. Local and other revenues are $9,941,946.74. Federal revenue is $15,000, and a careful spending and wise use of our resources for our district is resulting in a projected carryover of $4.8 million. Some expenditure assumptions. Program costs for instruction, support, administrative functions primarily consist of personnel-related expenses. Personnel costs will increase according to our collective bargaining agreements. The Coos Bay School District has worked collaboratively to build a budget keeping the students at the center of our focus and ensure we are working to meet our mission of preparing every child for a successful future. Careful planning and wise use of our resources has placed us in a position to propose a budget without staff cuts, program cuts, or a reduction in days. We have included important technology upgrades and supports, staffing decisions made during this school year, as well as a healthy capital projects transfer for our list of expenditures. Our total general fund requirements are budgeted for $40,314,169.42. I want to talk a little bit about some of the highlights of the 2020-2021 budget that's being presented to you tonight. This budget maintains current general fund staffing and support. It also adds necessary positions in order for us to bring the 7th grade Marshfield Junior High online, which will be housed at Blossom Gulch for the 2020-21 school year. We're currently in the process of building that building on the old Harding School site, and that'll be completed in the fall of 2021. In order to get that building or to get that 7th grade up and running, we needed to add 1.0 secretary, 1.5 custodial, 1.0 counselor, 1.0 physical education teacher, and a 0.33 music teacher. We'll also be sharing music staff as far as band with the high school music teacher coming down and teaching 7th grade band. This budget maintains funding for staffing through Measure 98, and I'll talk a little bit more about Measure 98 a little bit later in some of the challenges. It allows us to purchase new technology to improve our network infrastructure and make necessary repairs. Also allows us to continue to put $80,000 in the turf replacement fund for future replacement of our field turf at Pete Sussex Stadium. And we're able to transfer to capital projects funds for several maintenance projects around the district. Now I want to talk a little bit about challenges. We all know that there's going to be some instability in the state budget moving forward due to the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Initial revenue forecast shows a shortfall of roughly $400 million in the state budget for schools. There are some ways for the legislature to fill that shortfall using state reserves, federal aid, and the corporate activity tax. The legislature will meet later this month to work on that. Coos Bay School District also has a variety of ways that we would use to fill any gaps in funding once all that dust is settled from the state level. Those include exploring reduction in our contingency fund, reducing some capital project funds and technology purchases for 1 year. And we would also look at potential staffing cuts, program cuts, and furlough days. None of those have been decided at this time. If the need for that comes with a shortfall, we will meet collaboratively as a district, and we will make the necessary cuts and fill that gap. We have balanced this budget on the assumptions and recommendations from the COSA and OSBA. That's the Confederation of School Administrators and the Oregon School Boards Association, who are fighting very hard for state school funding to be maintained at 9.0 billion. They are confident that the legislature will work hard to reach that funding level for the state school fund. The concern is going to be what is left over in the various grant funds, which our districts and districts all over the state were hoping to receive to add important programs, staff, curriculum, and technology. I'm talking mostly about that corporate activity tax funding, which was going to go towards some additional things in our district and many districts around the state. The legislature does have the right to utilize that corporate activity tax to balance the state school fund. They also have state reserves that they could tap into. I believe there's somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.9 billion in that fund. And then there's also the potential of federal aid coming down the line for states and schools. The concern is that if they decide to fill the gap with the Measure 98 funds and some of those corporate activity funds, that there won't be much of that left to add things that we thought we might be able to add. We don't have those things included in this budget. We were very careful not to budget and hire positions relying on that money, just because of the fact that back in March we felt there's a possibility that that money may not be as large as we thought it could be. But we have several ways to get to that 9.0 billion. The legislature has options. We as a district have options because of the fact that we've been very careful over the past 4 years and budgeted very fiscally responsibly. We've had a good contingency fund. We've been able to put a good amount of money into our capital projects and our technology purchases. And so, you know, we feel like we can get there. And under the advice of COSA and OSBA, they recommended that school districts go ahead and budget at the 9.0 billion, and they're going to lobby like crazy at the state level to get us there. So this budget tonight is based upon 9.0 billion funding from the state school fund. With that said, I'm pleased to present a balanced budget tonight that is in alignment with the established district priorities to maintain class sizes, K through 3 at less than 25, 4 through 7th grade less than 28, and 8th through 12th grade on average less than 30. We want to provide instructional and behavioral support to all of our schools, continued curriculum purchases, which we've been able to do the last 4 years, update our technology, maintain a healthy capital projects to make necessary upgrades, and save for future repairs and maintenance to our new buildings. We have a brand new elementary school at Eastside, which will be coming online in August. We're happy to have that, excited to have that, but it's important that we have some capital projects money set aside for the maintenance and upkeep of that building. We also want to continue to provide time for professional development and professional learning teams for our teachers and staff. And that is the budget message for 2020-2021.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Before we move on, any questions for Brian? Okay, so then next up is the budget overview with our finance director, Candace McGowan.
Okay. Thank you all for joining us tonight. This whole budget process has been nothing but challenging from the beginning, doing it remotely to putting together a document to delivering it in this fashion. Probably the first thing that you'll notice is that this document is considerably less pages than normal.
Yeah.
And what I was hearing from school districts across the state who have already done their budget hearings and meetings was that the simpler you can keep this document, doing this virtually, the easier it is to follow along and have some conversation as you go. The ORS states that your role is to approve a budget by the function level. So usually in years past, we drill it down to the object. So you're looking at specifics in how much we're putting in salaries, how much we're putting in software, how much we're putting into dues and fees in all of our areas. And that has worked for us in the past, but that has created a 300-page document for us to go through. This year, we took it down to what is required, and we're presenting it by the function level. So you're able to see how much money we're proposing in instruction, which is our 1,000 level, in our support services, which is 2,000, community services 3,000, and then capital outlay, which is our 4,000 functions. So it does look different. By no means are we trying to hide something. We are just trying to make this as simple as possible. To follow that up, I want to just explain to you that there's really only a few different components between this budget and the one that we talked about last year. Simply put, we took all of our employees and whatever their bargaining agreement stated we needed to do for salaries for next year, we rolled those up. So most all employees received a step and a salary increase. We put money aside into our capital projects fund, like Brian stated earlier, for either projects for next year or projects in the future. And we tweaked our software budget a little bit. And then we added staffing for a new 7th grade building. And that's really, in a nutshell, those are the only differences between this budget and last year. So we will go ahead and get started going through this document. On page 6 is a description of what the state school fund grant looks like for us. In January, I estimate what I believe enrollment will look like the next year. Pretty much just throwing a dart at a number. That's even under the best scenario. You really only know the enrollment numbers that you have currently. So I just kind of roll those up. Next year could present its own challenges with not knowing if everybody will be comfortable sending their kids to school. So we have decreased our enrollment some to account for maybe some attendance issues that we might face next year. So you will see that ADMR, which is real number of students, I am projecting 3,173 students, like Brian mentioned earlier. This number includes Lighthouse and Resource Link. You'll see in the column over, which is our current year, they have our ADM broke out by the district, Lighthouse, and Resource Link. So we have a little bit of information for this year, whereas next year is just an estimate. They apply the weights. The weights are students in ESL programs, which are second language programs, IEP, students in poverty. Those are not numbers that I report. Those are numbers that they get from a variety of other sources. And you can see that the total for this year, 1920, is greater than the total that we're projecting for next year. And there is some fail-safe language that allows us to use the higher of the two numbers. So the state school fund is being calculated for us based on this year's numbers, because this year's numbers are greater than what we're projecting for next year. And you can see that on page 8. They are using about midway down under the general purpose grant section. They are using an extended ADMW of 3,853.4063, which is this year's numbers. So that leaves us with revenue from the state school fund of $25,557,222.68. And that is the main source of our general fund revenue. Starting on page 9 of this document is our revenue for all funds. So the first part of this document will be revenue. The second part will be expenditure. So we'll go through the revenue first. For the general fund, you can see we are projecting $40,314,169.42. This is again using a state school fund of $9 billion for the second year of the biennium. We don't know exactly what our revenue will be next year, so this is the best estimate that we have. If this is going to be less, as Brian said, that's when his admin team and help from his staff to discuss ways that we will have to change things within this budget. For the most part, most of this is the same as last year. I did increase our tax revenue by a small amount, $250,000. You will see that there is an area where I decreased some revenue, and that is in miscellaneous local. It's number 1990. And that is because last year we received quite a bit of revenue in E-rate funds for some projects that our IT department was doing. They've since done those projects, so now I have decreased that revenue back to where it historically has been. And in a nutshell, that is what makes up our general fund revenue.
Candace, I have a question. This is
Sure.
Abby. You said you increased the tax income, local tax income. I mean, if everyone else is estimating that tax income revenues are going to go down because people aren't going to be able to pay their taxes, then why are we using an inflated number?
Well, that's an interesting perspective. In talking with the county assessor's office, the majority of our area, property taxes are paid by escrow. So we do see about 94 to 96% of taxes collected, property taxes collected. There is conversation that may be less. but we don't know that for sure. So is it inflated? I wouldn't say that it's inflated. I would say that it's probably correct. We just may not have all of our taxpayers paying their taxes on time, but we also collect prior year taxes. So eventually we get it.
Candace, this is David. Just a general question. So, so the state fund is based on the ADM from the previous year, or can be calculated from the previous year?
It can be if the previous year is higher.
And does that get corrected at some point, or is that just what comes in terms of funding?
It's what is, yes, it does get corrected. And that's a good point. I'll explain that. We're always working with 3 years. We're working with a prior year, a current year, and a next year. So in May of every year, our final state school fund payment is adjusted for the previous year's ADM. But you're always going to have the calculation based on whatever the greatest enrollment was for the year. So if 1920 is greater enrollment than what 2021 will be, we will receive funding based on 1920.
2020.
If 1920 is a greater ADMW number, even in 2021, we will receive funding based on 1920's enrollment number.
1920 or 2020?
1920.
1920, 100 years ago?
No.
2019 to 2020.
Oh. Tax year 19.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You just kept saying it, and I was like, wait a minute.
Sorry, it wasn't registering with me what you were indicating there.
So Candace, if I understand it, so the state helps the districts have a sort of a higher potential guaranteed upfront money to make sure they can operate the way they need to. But then
yes,
there might be some
fail-safe rule. Mm-hmm.
But there might be some clawback at some point if the numbers don't sort of come in those areas. Is that?
It's possible. Mm-hmm.
Okay. The other question I had, and I didn't realize this from last year. So the state, in terms of generating income, subtracts all local income. So they must have a calculation about how much they ideally think we should get, and then they just reduce the local portion. Is that also correct?
Correct. If I'm understanding what you're asking, the state school fund grant, part of the calculation subtracts local tax revenue, and we receive the remainder. Is that what you're asking?
That's exactly what I'm asking. I said I probably heard that last year, but it didn't really register because it makes me realize that then the state has, ideally, they've already calculated what the maximum we should get, and whether we get that from local resources, no matter how much it is, it gets subtracted out.
Correct. And that is an adjustment later down the road. So if, for example, I'm telling ODE that our tax revenue will be 8.8 million. And you'll see in the proposed budget that is the combination of current year and prior year tax revenue. So I'm telling them that we're going to receive 8.8 million in local property tax. If that comes in differently, that's a part of the adjustment in the May final, the following year.
So if we get more local money, that gets less on the state. If we get less local money, then we get more from the state.
Correct.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, this is Kevin. I had a question on 1910 and 1930.
Okay.
I was wondering, they kind of seem similar with the rental and the rentals. I was just wondering why they were separate, and then what are the big ticket items on those that make them how they are?
Sure. 1910 is rentals, and that is our rent from Lighthouse School for renting Bunker Hill. And 1930, it's cut off, so you can't read what comes after from, but it's rental or lease payments from private entities. So that is rent we receive from First Student for renting our bus barn out in Empire.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Did we have any more questions on
Yeah,
general?
I have a question on, wait a minute, I'm having to go back and forth to see this. Right under that on co-curricular activities, what does that represent, the revenues from that?
This is revenue from mostly 7th and 8th grade sports.
Which leads me to my next question. Do we anticipate that sports are going to be played at schools this year?
We still have not received much direction on that. We're budgeting as if they are. Any more questions, or should I go on to our special revenue section?
Yes.
Okay. So our 200 funds, that's actually going to make up the majority of these pages here. These are special revenue funds that have certain rules attached to them. The majority of them are either state grants or federal grants. Except for these first few, these are student body funds at each of our schools. So the first one, the 200 fund, is Marshfield, 201 is Blossom Gulch, 202 is Madison, and so on. In 200, which is Marshfield, you can see that the majority of their revenue comes from club activities, admissions, athletic fees. They do have a small amount in some donations, and they have a beginning fund balance that I am projecting will be $415,000 for them. The next fund is 201. It's a Blossom Gulch. It's on a much smaller scale. It's pretty much fundraised money and fees for field trips, school supplies, things such as that. If we go to page 10, the next, let's see, 4 funds, 202, 203, 204, and 205. Those are very similar. Those are Madison, Millicoma, Sunset, and Harding. And then we start getting into some grant funds. 208 is the first fund where I am budgeting any revenue. That is a grant that we have received the last few years, which has funded some PE teachers at the elementary levels. We do not know if we will be receiving this funding, but if we do, it will be used to fund some PE staff. We have Fund 210, which is the Marshfield Scholarship Fund. This current year was the first year that I had put this in our budget, and it boosted our budget quite a bit. I'm anticipating $4.5 million most of which is invested with OCF, and we work with the Scholarship Fund Committee on the contributions and scholarships that are awarded for this fund. We are basically just the custodian of their funds for them.
I'm a little confused how it grew so much if all we added was $500,000. Because at the end of last year or this year, it should be 3 million. If we add $500,000, that's only 3.5 million. So I don't understand where the rest of that money came from.
Okay. Well, last year was, you can see that last year was the first year that this was in our proposed document, and I took a guess at how much it was. And I was very low in my guess.
Okay. Okay.
Let's see. Moving on to page 11, we have some. Wait a
minute. I have a question on that Fund 212. Why is it only 45 cents?
Well, this 45 cents has been following me around for several years now. It was a grant that we received back in 2014-15, and it is 45 cents that somebody did not spend, and it just continues to be sitting there until I don't think anyone will ever spend it, but
I'm sure there's some project that we can.
I'm sure.
45 cents on.
Hey, Candace, this is
Yeah.
David again.
Mhm.
Just the school funds, the small school funds, is Blossom just going to be converted to East Side, and then is Harding going to hold over for the junior high? Is that likely to be the case?
For the student body funds,
Mm-hmm.
yes, we're actually going to be working with the principals on splitting those funds up a little bit, just because third grade will be moving into Millicoma and Sunset. So we'll dive into those a little bit and kind of shuffle them up a little ways, because the junior high, the 7th grade building, is going to need a little bit of funds as well. So some of those teachers have small little accounts that are wrapped up in there. So we'll move those with them. And then we'll just rename Blossoms to East Side.
And are these basically determined by population of the schools?
No, these are actually funds that they collect at the beginning of the school for school fees, field trips, cookie dough fundraisers, gift wrap fundraisers, the little things that they do throughout the school year. They put into each school probably has 25 little fund numbers within this fund for them to spend their money. Okay, so moving on to page 11. We have a series of small grants here. We have the Title 4A, which is a federal grant. House Bill 3499, which is an English language learners grant. And we have a new Fund 216, which is a school emergency education relief fund, which is a part of the Federal CARES Act package. This is the number that was given to us back in, I think it was February or March. It's reasonable to believe that this number may be smaller, but we have not received anything additional since this number. So this is the one that I plugged in here. We also, when we get to the expense portion of this budget, we also have not received real clear guidance on how we can spend that money. So we have it in here. We just don't have it very specifically budgeted because we just don't have very much information on it yet. We do have down towards the bottom of this page, we do have Measure 98, which Brian had talked about earlier. This too is a state grant that we know will probably be less than what we have received this year. But again, we have not received any information on what that number will be. Brian, I don't know if you want to chime in on what you know, it's kind of an unknown right now.
It is. We were advised to reduce it by a certain percentage to start with, but this is one of those funds where the corporate activity tax was used to fully fund Measure 98. If you'll remember, when Measure 98 was passed, the state partially funded it, and then when the corporate activity tax was approved, they went ahead and fully funded it for this last year. We'll have a little bit of carryover from this year that wasn't spent that can go into next year, and there will be a little bit of reduction. You know, we didn't budget necessarily to spend a lot of the things that we spent this year out of that fund. We tried to maintain the staffing, which was important, but there were a lot of other things that we purchased, like technology and professional development, things like that we are thinking if there is a cut, those things will be removed before the staffing.
If you go to page 12, we have a new fund called Student Investment Account. It's Fund 224. This is the corporate activity tax revenue that we were all very excited to receive, had talked about ways that we were going to spend it. It's reasonable to believe that this will be significantly less than what I have in the budget. But again, we don't know how much less. So this was the last number that I had received. So it's the one that I plugged in here, but of course we will not spend what we don't have. It's more or less a placeholder for when we do know what we're going to get. The rest of these are pretty in line with what we budget every year. We have the Madison After School Grant, our Medicaid admin claiming, our nurses have a donation fund. If you go to the next page,
sorry. Yeah, this is Kevin. I had a question about 236 on the Millicoma Marsh Trail. I saw that it went up some. I was just kind of curious on what that money is spent on.
This is some funds that we have had for many years. I could not tell you the origin of the funds. We did receive a small donation this year, which is why I budgeted a little bit more. But this is used to maintain the trail over behind the Millicoma track. Jamie Faraday, a retired science teacher, every once in a while he will buy a new lawnmower to maintain the field, or a couple of hand tools to maintain the field. A few years ago, we paid for some signage for the trail. We don't spend much very often. It's just kind of sat there for several years.
I know this year they dealt with runoff in the parking lots and stuff. That was an issue.
And a lot of it is volunteer work. It's just a small pot of money that occasionally they will use something out of to help them with what they're doing. But it was originally donated by somebody many, many years ago. Does that answer your question, Kevin?
Yes, thank you.
I have a question about this broadcast, career pathway grant broadcast.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have a broadcast program at the high school?
This is what the CTE Career Technical Education Program. These are Perkins funds at the state level that we receive. One of them is for our technology classroom. The other one's for our construction program. Our broadcast is our radio program. And then we have our manufacturing program. And it's just a small amount of money that they have received for a few years now. And we anticipate receiving it again.
Do they have they been working like to provide radio transmission during all of this? That would have been nice. They could play music and everything.
They do. We have 2 radio stations that the high school is part of the high school's radio program, an AM and an FM. Or is there 2 FMs now?
2 FMs now, and they have been broadcasting during this whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great.
Including a Monday morning superintendent update.
Yes.
which used to be the coach's corner when we had sports.
Very nice, Ryan. I saw it. It was riveting. Hopefully, we'll get some football games here at some point, right?
The next fund that may be of interest to you is Fund 244, which is Resource Link Charter School. We maintain their books for them. So this $493,416 is pass-through funds that we will provide to Resource Link based on their ADM. Again, their ADM was part of that 3,173 number. So we calculate what that is per student, and 80% goes to Resource Link. We have our food service fund. That's where when families pay for our meals, when we receive funds back for our community eligibility provision from ODE, that's where that money goes. The next page is some federal funds. The first 4, 254 through 267, those are special education program funds that we receive. The first one, 254, we use that solely for paying salaries to our special programs staff, a portion of their salaries. Then we have our Title 1A and Title 1D. Indian education, a Nike grant. Those are all very specific on what we can use those funds for. The next page, we have a Fund 297, which is our community liaison. That is all donations, and that is money that helps run our ARC program up at the high school. And that brings us to our 300 funds, which are called debt service funds. We have 2. We have Fund 300 and Fund 302. Fund 300 is our repayment of some general obligation bonds that were sold many years ago to buy down our PERS rate. It's called the PERS Unfunded Actuarial Liability Fund. You can see that most of the revenue is in Function 1970, Service to Other Funds. How we generate that revenue is each time we run payroll, we have a percentage attached to each employee that calculates a PERS expense And instead of paying that money to PERS, we pay it to this fund, and it makes the payments on the financing for the sale of the bonds that happened years ago. And then we have Fund 302, which is our general obligation bonds that we sold back in 2018 to fund the first portion of our construction projects. This revenue comes from the tax levy that we all pay for in November on our property taxes.
So Candace, is that Fund 300, is that going, I assume that'll be paid off at some point?
It will not be paid off in my working years. I believe it has like 18 more years or 19 more years or something to that effect. Maybe not that many, but I think it's in the teens.
So it was not just a 20-year measure. It was not just a lot of the bonds are 20 years or maybe even 30, but it sounds like it might be longer than that.
I think that it was longer than 20. I don't think it was 30, but it was over 20. And that brings us to our capital projects funds, and we have several of these. Our Fund 450 is the fund where when I'm proposing a transfer out of the general fund, you'll see it when we get to the expenditure section, into this fund. And I am proposing $1 million, let's see here, just over $1 million as transfer from, there's a few different places, part of that is the general fund, and then part of it, a couple funds down below. This fund is very, very important to me. I feel like we made an investment in our new buildings, and we need to be putting some money away for the future to be able to care for these buildings. And that's what we're doing, just slowly trying to put some money away so that when it comes time for paint and roofing and HVAC systems or whatever it may be, we're able to try the best we can to take care of these buildings. We have Fund 451, which is a new fund, and that is part of a donation of an estate that we received earlier this year. And it has roughly $45,000 in it. And we have Fund 453, which is the South Stadium project. We are anticipating receiving more donations for the committee to complete their project. They threw out $250,000. I don't know if they will receive that all in 1 year or if that may take some time, but that's their goal. Then we get down to Fund 458 and 459. These are two seismic grants that we received a couple of years ago. And part of the requirement was that we had to put some matching funds into these two funds from the general fund. So in the Fund 458, back in the 17-18 year, we transferred $179,000. In 459, we transferred $13,000, and that was going to complete those two projects with the grant funds we received. Fast forward to today, and the projects cost a little less than what we had set aside to do. So these two funds I am proposing in the expenditure section to move those two amounts into Fund 450 and close those out. We're done with the seismic grants. Fund 460 is our Oregon Department of Energy Cool School program. This is revenue that we receive monthly from Pacific Power. This money is very specific on what it can be used for. It has to pass several tests on energy savings, and Pacific Power has to give approval before we can spend this money. And it's been several years since we have done any projects with it. We just keep receiving, it's somewhere around $54 to $5,500 a month we receive in that fund. We have Fund 461, which is where our bond proceeds have been deposited. I am projecting a beginning fund balance July 1st of 25 million. That's what I'm projecting we will have remaining of the first 40 million that we sold. Tomorrow we sell our second set of bonds, the remaining 19.995 million. So you can see function 5110, I have revenue of 19.995. I do not have a bond premium calculated in there. However, my pre-sale phone call today has me feeling very, very positive about our sale in the morning. So I'm not going to jinx myself and tell you how much I think we might end up with, but I feel good about it. So let's all wish for the best in the morning that we come out with maybe a few extra $1 million.
That would be great.
Yes, it would.
Can I ask, just to kind of go back just a second, that
Sure.
cool school money that's sort of sitting there, is there no really good application for that funds? I mean, I know we've had discussions about needs for some HVAC kind of improvement things, or is there a window so narrow that we don't really have good ways that we could take advantage of that funds?
No, and that's a really good question. We do hope at some point to be able to replace the HVAC units at Marshfield, but it takes a whole lot more than $630,000. So we're hoping that between bringing these couple of new schools on in the next couple of years, that could reduce some maintenance that we're spending right now, coupled with continuing to earn money in this fund, that will give us the amount we need to be able to move forward with that project.
Candidates, what's the projected cost on that? Do we have one?
About 2 years ago, it was, I want to say it was like 1.1 million, 1.2 million to replace. I don't even remember. Is there 12 units at the high school? I can't, there's several units on the roofs at the high school. I can't remember how many there are, but
they're the heaters and air conditioners that are plugged in from the outside to the classrooms. And there's probably, gosh, I don't know how many of them there are. There's one for every classroom, pretty much. And you can't buy parts for them anymore.
So in 10 years, we'll have another, at 60,000 a year, we'll have another 600,000, right?
Yeah.
well, obviously the
And costs will do what in 10 years, David? Tell me what costs will do in 10 years.
Yeah, it'll probably be closer to 2 million by then. It's on the list. It is something that we want to do. We know it needs to be done. Rick and I have talked about it extensively. We're just hoping to get through this construction that we're in and then come up with a plan to be able to afford to do it and use this money as part of it.
I had a question about 451 on the athletic project. So was that the donation that was put in that's kind of earmarked for the baseball program for the building, or is there other stuff also in part of that?
451 has not really been discussed much. It was part of an estate that we received, and we don't have any specific uses for that right at this moment. I believe what you're referring to is the Kime estate, and that money was actually deposited at the high school, and that's part of the transfer that will go into capital projects to be used for some baseball dugout projects.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was thinking about. Yeah, I just wanted to say 00 and then at 45,000. So I didn't know if something was kind of in the role of something going on.
No, this was a different different contribution from an estate.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Our next fund is 462, which is our turf field reserve fund. This is the one that about 5 or 6 years ago, we started transferring $80,000 a year into, in hopes that at the time that the Marshfield turf needed to be replaced, we would have, if not all, the majority of the funds to be able to replace it instead of financing it like we had to do last time. And that concludes the revenue portion of our budget.
I have a question on things like this turf field reserve fund. Does the fund realize any interest during the year from their funds sitting there?
462 does not. We have a few funds that do receive interest. Our 450, let's see, where there's a 1510 earnings on investments. So in 450, 453, 461, those are where we tack on the interest. Does anybody have any questions on the revenue portion before we move into the expenditure section? Nope. Okay. The first section is the general fund, and our ending total matches our revenue total, $40,314,169.42. There's not a lot that has changed here other than salaries, bringing on the 7th grade junior high building. I did make a few notes here of areas that I thought you might be interested in. Function 1288, which is charter school, and I'm on page 18. $2,439,881. That is a portion of that is what would be transferred into Fund 244, which we talked about earlier, is Resource Link, and then a portion of that is goes to Lighthouse Charter School. Lighthouse receives 95% of their ADM, whereas Resource Link is 80% of ADM. So that's what that expenditure is.
What is 2660, the technology services? What does that, is that personnel or is that equipment?
Well, it's a combination of things. The function is 2660, but within that, there is salaries, benefits, software, hardware, some dues and fees for items that we pay annual fees on. And I will point out that our current year's budget had 14 FTE, whereas we're proposing 6.2. That is not a reduction in staff. what we found was years prior, we had some webmaster extra duty contracts, and those extra duties were calculating a full-time equivalency. So we're not reducing staff. We just are correcting the way that it was proposed the previous year. There really wasn't 14 people the previous year.
Can I express, though, some concern over that number going down? I mean, if we've learned anything in the last 3 months, it's that probably your technology needs to be increased by $2 million. You know, just because of what we have to do about remote learning. So is there any consideration to allocating more money towards technology? I mean, I heard feedback that things weren't perfect.
Oh, absolutely. But let me just point something out about our technology budget. In 18-19, it was $884,000 is what we spent on technology. And this current year, we doubled it. And we doubled it because we had some projects that were partially E-rate funded that our IT department was able to complete. Some additional switches, some wiring, new clock system at the high school, a variety of projects. So those projects have since been completed. So his new list of projects were a little bit less expensive, and we no longer would be receiving that additional E-rate money to offset our current. There's no doubt that they could use more money, absolutely. But their department isn't specifically where those expenditures come from to begin with. Most Chromebooks and technology that is given to the students come from the grants that we talked about earlier, not necessarily our general fund expenditures.
Is that though, if we end up having to replace a bunch of Chromebooks because they didn't all get returned and because the wear and tear is harder on them, we won't have the grant funds to cover those additional needs, will we? That will have to come out of our general funds.
It's possible. It's also possible that it may be an allowable expenditure under that CARES Act, the school relief funds money that we may be receiving as part of the federal CARES Act. Part of the dialogue around that is that the school may be looking different in the fall, and there are things that we will need to purchase in order to follow the guidelines that we be given when it gets to that point.
Pivot.
And we did purchase 150 brand new Chromebooks that we have here in the technology right when this whole thing happened. So we have some ready to go. I do want to report back that we handed out just over 1,000 Chromebooks to families and students, and we received back at this point. We've only had 2 days of collection, and we've gotten close to 900 of those back.
Hi, this is Kevin. I had a question on 2410, Office of the Principal.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering, I don't know the breakdown on that, but with the high number, kind of where that goes. Thank you.
Office of the Principal, the 2410 function is the FTE that you see is administrators assigned to the buildings and secretarial staff. They're all funded out of 2410, as well as they have some software money. They have some supply money, dues and fees money. It's all wrapped up in that 2410.
Thank you.
You're welcome. 2552, which is our transportation expenses, that was a couple $100,000 increase. I just want to talk about that real quick. That is, our last RFP with First Student was a 10-year contract, and a lot of things have changed in our economy within the 10 years. So we met with First Student and have negotiated a little bit of an increase for them. They were running in the red. This is just going to be an effort to have them more break even. In exchange, we are getting a new fleet of buses and some two transit vans and an activity bus. So that's what that is. And then in function 5200, transfer of funds, I have just over $1 million. That is where the 80,000 for the turf fund comes from, and then the remainder is for a transfer into a capital projects fund 450 for those future maintenance items that we talked about. Any questions on general fund expenditures? Okay. Now we will real quickly go over our special revenue fund expenditures. These are very specific to however the grant is awarded or what the fund allows as far as expenditures. 200, 201, 202, 203, these are all student body. Those are only spent on their extracurricular activities, which is 1113 is their function. We have the fund 208. Again, that money would only be spent if we received that grant, which was to fund additional PE teachers at the elementary level.
What is the difference on funds 202, 203, 204? You have this fund number 1113, and then all of a sudden at Harding it goes to 1132.
1113 is
looks like you have all the elementary schools together.
Well, that's just the code for K6.
Okay.
So it's instructional for K6. So you'll see that Harding is 1132, so that is more of your 7 through 12.
Okay.
Let's see here. We have the Fund 210, which is the Marshfield Scholarship Fund. The reason that we have $2 million, even though that's not the amount that is awarded every year for scholarships, we received those checks in for donations, and then we write a check to OCF. So that's the function that we use to receive it in, and then it goes back out again. Um, 214, which is 4A, 215 English language learners. That's primarily staffing. And then we have that fund 216, which is the School Emergency Education Relief Fund, which is part of the CARES Act. Again, I did budget that we would have expenditures in instructional. I don't know what that might look like until we receive guidance, but it's more of a placeholder than anything. Let's see if we have Measure 98 Fund 222. Again, we will spend that in the areas that we are allowed to spend it, and only spend the amount that they award us when we know what that amount is.
What is Fund 221 turnaround efforts, and why aren't we funding it anymore?
That's not something that we fund. That it was something that the state funded, and that it ended in June 30th of 2020. I don't know if that. I don't think it's continuing. Is why I didn't put anything in there. I think it's done. Yeah.
Okay.
And again, these 200 funds, they're not funds that we put money in. They're funds that we receive based on how somebody applied for them when they wrote the grant or such. Yeah. Most of these are special programs. We have special education, Title I, 1A, 1D. Those are special educational assistants in our buildings. Some have a math teacher, a reading teacher. That's where they're funded. And that's, for the most part, the majority of the big special revenue funds, which brings us then to our debt service funds. Again, Fund 300 is the PERS UAL bonds that were sold. So you can see that we will have principal and interest payments to make out of that, totaling just over 1.2 million. Fund 302, which is our general obligation bond for our construction that we have going on right now. Our principal and interest payment on that is just over 3.1 million. And that covers the first 40 million and the additional 20 million. They're two separate principal and interest payments that we have to make, but we only have to levy one lump sum.
Candace, can we go just back? I just interested. I mean, we did some stuff around school lunches, around having certain schools being eligible. There was some discussion about not getting any reimbursements from some schools around the cost of lunches. I just wonder, is there any obvious impact budget wise on some of those changes, or is that then pretty anticipated?
Well, the Fund 251 does make more revenue when families pay for their lunches than what we receive when ODE reimburses us for what is labeled a reimbursable meal. So when we moved to the CEP program, the Community Eligibility Provision Program, we knew that was going to eat away a little bit at our ending fund balance in food services, because we would not be making as much money being reimbursed as we were when a family paid for a meal.
Right.
We should not go in the negative, because of the cost of providing the service, we are being reimbursed for that. We're just not making that a little additional amount over it.
Yeah, and I think the board, kind of knew that was likely. That's what you guys told us. I think there was some. Are we sort of staying within the goalposts? And it sounds like sort of we are in terms of what we had anticipated.
Well, this has been a unique year to take a look at that. As far as we moved into what ODE Nutrition Services calls the summer food program in order to serve meals effective March 17th through the end of June. So this is kind of a skewed year to see how that is going to work for us.
Sorry about that. Oh, I was wondering, since the food changed, did the district end up saving money going to the types of meals? And then if so or not, what happened to the meals that we possibly already bought that didn't get used? Thank you.
Okay, so if I'm understanding what you're asking, the food did change as far as we're not serving any meals that have to be heated. They're more of a sack lunch style. Is that what you're referring to, Kevin?
Yeah, I just didn't know if that it ended up saving a lot of money or if it, in a way, kind of added an extra cost.
I can't say that it is more or less. We really don't have very much data. It's kind of been a fly by the seat of your pants type of situation. And they're also serving, not only are they doing the lunches, but we're also providing a breakfast and a supper at some locations. So the whole thing is just so different than it was previously to be able to gauge whether it's more or less expensive.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Any additional 200 fund questions? Or I think we moved on to the 300 fund, but we went backwards a little bit. Is there any additional questions before we move on? Okay, let's see. I think we're in the capital projects, page 26. Let's see. You can see in Fund 453, which is the South Stadium project, where I have budgeted that they would be spending that $250,000 that they are hoping to receive. Again, we won't spend it if they do not receive it, but that is their goal. And then Fund 458 and 459, you can see that I budgeted transfers out of those two funds to close them out. We're done with those projects and just move those funds into 450. Uh, 461, which is our construction general obligation bonds. I have budgeted to just keep spending that money and get those buildings done. And 462, which is the turf fund that we put $80,000 a year in. I do not anticipate spending that, so it is put into unappropriated ending fund balance. We will not be spending that money this year. So that brings us to our revenue and expenditures balancing at $112,532,686.17. I know that there are a lot of unknowns in these revenue and expenditure line items, and we are just very hopeful that the revenue comes in at what we have budgeted here. But if it doesn't, we have areas here that we will take a look at, such as the transfer into capital projects. The increase in technology. That we have areas, where I hope it doesn't come to that, and we can do those things. But those are areas that we can look at. Should our state school fund not be at $9 billion, like we budgeted?
The other item that I notice is sort of completely missing from this budget, and I sat in on United Way grant application review today. And the big thing being mentioned by everybody is PPE. I mean, you're going to have all these kids come back to the school. Are we going to provide PPE? I mean, there's no budget item in here, and that's going to be a big budget item, I think, come this.
Actually, it is on, well, it's not split out here, but if you look at page 18, we have a function called 2542. And you can see that this year we had budgeted just over 3 million. And this next year we are budgeting just over 3.5 million. That would be where we purchase masks, shields, gowns, whatever that direction is that ODE gives us. That is the function where we would expense that. And again, that could also be one of the allowable expenses in the school relief fund that is a part of the CARES Act. We're just still waiting for that information, but definitely that expenditure is right there at the top of our priority list when we know what that looks like.
Hi, this is Kevin. I was also wondering about something possible for down the future on for the budgeting committee to figure out, especially since we have the younger kids going to be over in Millicoma, down on the field, there's a lot of activity between people who don't check in throughout the day. There's really not a good secure type field there. So anybody can really show up and let their dog out. And now that we have the kindergarten level even going to be out there, if there's a possible way we could start budgeting towards getting some way to make it more secure and go from there. I just get some input on that from you guys.
I'll let Brian, that's a great point, Kevin, and that is actually something that we have talked about. That Millicoma field is hard to control. There's so many community members that use it, and they want to use it during the day as well. So it's been communicated quite a bit. I'll let Brian talk about how that's going.
Sure, and it's hard because we share a driveway and access to the Millicoma Marsh Trail system, which is used throughout the day and can be used. It's not owned by the school district. And then the port of Coos Bay actually owns part of that property too, that butts right up to our field. But, you know, we certainly could look at the possibility of fencing in our track and field there. We just haven't had, you know, in the past, we haven't had any major issues with those groups. And, you know, we have supervision for our kids as they go down there. But it is a concern at times when people jump out and turn a dog loose and run onto the field. But it's something we need to look at as far as in our capital projects when we look to shore up our security of our facilities. That one's a tough one just because of its location adjacent to the Millicoma Marsh Trail and the Port of Coos Bay.
Yes, thank you.
Nice job, Candace. Appreciate your hard work on this. Good job and well presented.
Thank you.
Oh, my bad. I had myself double muted there. So it looks like Candace finished her basic overview, and we're kind of in the midst of our item number 6, the budget discussion. If anybody else has any questions or things they'd like to discuss regarding this budget, I know that our staff have done a pretty good job of trying to anticipate what's going to happen next year with funds that might show up, might not show up. We might get a percentage of those. Kids might be in school full time, they might be in school part time, it might be all virtual like it has been at the end of this year. And it really is a lot to plan for, and I think they've done a pretty good job with that so far. And we've been very fortunate in our anticipated use of the Student Success Act funds and not starting a bunch of programs very quickly that we're going to have to shut down, or hiring people we're going to have to let go right away. So I'd like to commend you for that. But before we move on to the public comment, I don't know if we received any other questions for Candace. Okay, so have we received any public comment?
Let me look at my email here real quick. I do not have any email with public comment. I do not see anything. No.
Okay. So that brings us to our next steps, and that's basically up to us as a committee. We could go forward and basically approve sending this budget on to the school board for their next meeting. If there's something that you have a real issue with, there's something you'd like to take a closer look at, we can discuss that, and we do have another meeting date scheduled, and we can go over that once any further information or facts are found. So what's everybody's preference?
I would really like to be able to work more with some kind of safety plan with the field, with the kids going to be right there, and it kind of be a new thing because the community's not going to be used to a different environment. And in the past, I have noticed that, yes, there's staff there and they try hard, but sometimes people just could easily walk up. So, and even though there's signs, they kind of walk right past them,
Yeah, and then, during our tour on Tuesday, going through the East Side School, Kara Davidson was on the tour with us, and she'd mentioned that particularly for the kindergarten through second graders, is they're more or less going to be confined to that area right around the school. They're not going to be going down to the Millicoma track for recess. I don't know what the equivalent is for the Millicoma students themselves. And it is an issue that's been there for a while, and it's something that we might be able to take care of sometime in the future. Yeah.
I just wonder, Kevin, this is David, that what you're talking about, well, important, probably doesn't really affect us as a budget committee. Really, does it? I mean, the funds are potentially available. So in terms of what we're, trying to figure out today, I don't know. I feel personally pretty comfortable with the budget. I mean, I certainly recognize what Adrian is saying too. I mean, there's so many unknowns, it's really hard to generate a good budget, but I think you guys have done a good job of trying to maintain some level of conservativeness in the midst of the unknowns, and not doing a bunch of new things when we know that could create problems on the other end. So just personally, I feel pretty comfortable with the budget as written. It's pretty close to what we've done in the past. I mean, I know there's some changes just because of the increased staffing that we need for the junior high next year. But it seems to be pretty much in line with the solid budgets that we've had in the past.
Yeah, I was also on the budget committee for the ESD, and if you think this budget's crazy, you should see what they're dealing with over there, because they usually guess, their budget's based on a guess on top of a guess on top of a wish list. And so it's really all over the place. Any further discussion? Anything else you'd like to get off your chest? Anything you'd like to suggest?
I'm just going to echo what some other people said, but I felt like this did a pretty good job of of balancing the factors that are coming up, and we are in an unknown time, and that has me really concerned as we look at what this budget is, because I'd hate to see a more dire situation than what we even anticipate. But I feel like this is a great point with a lot of contingencies sort of considered as we're moving forward. So I thought that was I feel like it's a really responsible budget. And I hadn't thought about the concerns about the field at Millicoma until they were just brought to my attention. But I feel like those are things that, while concerning, should be discussed maybe at the board level or administrative level and figure out a plan of action. And then we'll figure out how to finance it. But I feel like the money should be there if we need to do something.
Yeah, and another interesting item, and it's something that came up at the ESD budget as well, and that we've got these potential piles of money that are coming up, and if we don't have them in our budget, we can't spend them, whether they come in or not, and that happens a lot because the ESD is run mainly on grants and requests from school districts. So they've got a ton of stuff in their budget that they're not anticipating even getting the funds for. And it kind of works the same way for us. If it's in our budget and it comes in, we can spend it. If it comes in, but we haven't budgeted for it, we can't really spend that money. The budget request needs to go to the school board and get the approval and then go through that whole process. So from my point of view, yeah, everybody's done a really good job kind of hedging their bets on what's going to happen in the next few months. Okay, so in that case, let's see, I have a proposed motion. Let me look it up here because it's a mouthful, and typically somebody other than the committee chair does this, but it's a bit awkward. Yes, Candace?
Somebody just left the meeting. Do we still have enough? I just want to make sure that if you read that, you have enough people listening.
Okay.
Somebody. It must be Addie, maybe. Oh, maybe she's back.
Yeah, some people are having to come and go.
Okay, I just want to make sure that when you read it, there's enough people to.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
I think we're back. I think it was Bryce. He just popped back in.
So yeah, I've got
same time, right, to do it.
hang on, Addie, we can't hear you. Your computer's muted. Still not coming through. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Did we lose Addie?
Connection seemed to be spotty.
Shelby, can you unmute Addie?
It looks like she's unmuted already, just nothing coming through.
Yes, I can call her with a phone to be able to call in. Maybe I think you can hear us, but we can't hear her. Okay, so she can hear us, but we can't hear her. Let me
Can we vote by chat?
Addie, can I text you a phone number for you to call in so we can hear you? Or I can call you with it. Okay, let me call her.
Okay, thank you for holding during technical difficulties. And then I just want to double check, James, I can see you and sometimes it looks like you're talking and sometimes I don't see the mute and it looks like you're talking, but I haven't heard anything in a while.
I was talking to a little kid. I'm trying to make dinner and everything, so he was in here talking to me.
Oh, no worries.
Addie has the phone number.
Multitasking at its finest.
Just want to make sure everybody's able to take part here.
Addie will be calling in shortly on a different device.
Okay, we'll give her a minute or so.
In the meantime, Adrian, I kind of had a question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, if we were to add some kind of a safety fencing situation, whatever, for Millicoma, just on the budget, even though there's nothing really there for it, could we do that? And then if something comes along, it would be able to go into it. But then if it don't come along, at least it's there in case it did come along. You know what I'm saying? Or
I think I can answer that, Adrian. Kevin, what it is that you do tonight is you approve a budget by fund in 4 categories. So you would be approving us to spend X amount of dollars in support services, X amount of dollars in instruction, and X amount of dollars in community services and capital outlay. Within those is the conversations that I think somebody recommended earlier that you would have with administration and or the board, so that we talked about the projects that you would like to see done. It's not necessarily something that you add to the budget right now before you approve it. You would be giving us authority to spend money in those 4 areas. So whomever it was that suggested it, probably a good avenue would be for you to meet with Rick Roberts, the maintenance supervisor, maybe Gary Roberts, and talk to them about what options would be, what is something that would address the safety, how would that work, and then we would take a look at how that could be implemented and what that would cost. And it may be something that we could afford this year. It may be something that we set aside funds for in the future, maybe next year or the next year. Maybe it's something that we can incorporate into the wonderful bond proceeds that we're going to receive in the money when we sell $20 million worth of bonds. I mean, there's a variety of areas, but it's not necessarily something that you are approving or rejecting in the budget tonight.
okay, I appreciate. I was kind of had the understanding that if it wasn't in there, then if the money came along, it wouldn't happen. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay, I apologize for all my technological problems. My question was, as a school board, do you feel comfortable that if you were forced to face another school year exactly like this one, like the rest of this year, that the amount of this budget is sufficient to do that?
Well, personally, I can say as a school board, we never seem to have as much money as we would like for all of our projects. Um, as regards next year, I think this is a well thought out budget for next year, and we definitely could get along with what we have in here. Even if a couple of things don't come through at the levels at which we're expecting them to, we might struggle a little bit. Compared to other school districts around the state, I know there are so many districts who are planning to do a lot of cuts for next year. They're already working on cutting staff and programs, and we're very fortunate to not be in that situation. We still do have a pretty healthy carryover planned, and we've been working very hard to build that up and to maintain it. And if worse comes to worse, then this might be one of those situations where we use some of that planned reserve money. I mean, if there's ever kind of a rainy day, this is probably one of those days.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
I just want to say something really quick because I don't want it to go not said. We do not know if we will receive all that we're proposing in this budget. We're hopeful and we would love to, but we would not be being honest if we said that it's likely that we will not. And we're asking you to approve a budget knowing that we may not receive all of these funds. And that's where, our monthly meetings with our financial reports monthly with the board that showcase where we are spending money. We're going to stay within our means. We're just trying to put together a document, one, because we're required to, but two, with the most latest information that we have, which is still not very good information, in hopes that it does work. But between all of us, it probably isn't going to pan out the way that we think it will. And we're just going to have to do the best we can at using our contingency, at hoping that our carryover comes in at the very aggressive amount that I'm hoping that it does. This budget does not contain staff cuts or furloughs or any of that thing, but that doesn't mean that they may not happen should the economy not, play out like we hope that it does. And we will do the best that we can with the funds that we do receive.
Yeah, I guess I would say I feel comfortable in the sense that, whatever ends up happening in the next, 6 months or a year, it's going to affect all school districts throughout the state, throughout the country. So we're not going to be out there hanging alone like the only one. I mean, and as long as we're sort of in the middle of the herd, I think, we'll have, I think we'll find a path through it. We're not in a situation where we're extremely vulnerable relative to other school districts. So whatever impacts us is going to impact every other school district. So I feel good in the sense of knowing that, we're in a solid position, and we'll have some ability to adjust in the same way that everybody else will if we need to.
We're in what I would say better shape than a lot of districts in the state, just because we have been responsible and kept that contingency fund high, just for something like this. And we didn't spend a lot of the student investment account money. Some districts spent that money already, and that money's not going to come through, and they're scrambling, and they're going to be making major cuts. I think once the dust settles, I think the legislative session is scheduled for somewhere between June 22nd and July 3rd. At that time, I hope they will make a decision on how they're going to fill the gap. The difference between what we're going through right now and the economic hard times we saw 10 years ago or so is that there are some options to help dig ourselves out of the hole. It's just a matter of which one of those the legislature chooses to use, and when they're done, how big is the hole that we need to fill from our standpoint? And we have some ability to fill some gaps on our end too. So, we're like you say, I feel very comfortable with this budget. I think, there is going to be some things that do come in and don't come in, as far as some of those grants and some of that student investment money. And if it doesn't come in, we don't spend it. I think this covers us from a general educational standpoint.
Then I move we adopt the budget as proposed.
Okay, so this is where it gets a little bit complicated. The actual budget motion is fairly long and involved.
So you should make it.
So, like I said, this is a little bit unusual. I generally don't like making any motions as chair of the committee or the school board, but in this case, and bear with me for a second, so I would move the budget committee of the Coos Bay School District approve the 2020-2021 budget as follows. The general fund in the amount of $40,314,169.42. Special revenue fund in the amount of $17,325,175.33. The debt service fund in the amount of $4,424,250. The capital projects fund in the amount of $50,469,091.42, for a total of all funds of $112,532,686.17. Furthermore, the budget committee of the school district approves the tax rate of $4.5276 per $1,000 of assessed value be assessed in support of the general fund, and $3,558,022 for the general obligation bond levy in the debt service fund for principal and interest.
Second.
Okay, let me. That is a mouthful. So, all right. So that motion is on the table. Last chance for any discussion or comments. Okay, so I'm going to go down the list and ask for your vote, and I'm going to do the same order we did before. So for myself, I vote aye. Dusty. Nope, did we lose Dusty?
Looks like he's not showing up right at the moment.
Okay, we'll
He's
come
right
back
in there.
We'll come back to Dusty in a moment. Kevin.
Aye.
David.
Aye.
Bryce.
Aye.
James.
Aye.
Addie.
Aye.
Sue.
Aye.
Rick.
Aye.
Kyle.
Aye.
And Donna.
Aye.
Okay. Dusty, are you still with us? Okay. Let's see. Shelby, is there a way you can give Dusty a quick call and see if he A, heard the motion, and B, what his vote would be?
Plan the timber.
I don't know, was that him?
It goes right to his voicemail. It did look like he
I did see
moved a
something.
little bit.
Can we?
Oh, there he is. Hey, Dusty, good to have you back.
You're on mute, Destin.
So if you can hear us, Dusty, we need to know two things. One is if you heard the motion, and two, what your vote would be if you heard it correctly.
Could he respond in the chat?
I'm sending him a note right now.
Carrier pigeon. He's way up there. He's got carrier pigeons.
He just messaged me and said yes and yes.
Okay. So, thank you. So that is a unanimous vote from the members of the committee who are present tonight. So again, I'd like to thank everybody for your time here tonight. Heard lots of thoughtful comments and questions. Special thanks to Brian and Candace for working on the budget, getting everything together. I know it's usually kind of a long and complicated process, and that was just made a little more complicated this year. So thank you again for participating on our budget committee. If your term is up, and probably even if it's not, you'll be contacted later at some point to see if you'll be continuing and if you'd like to continue on the committee. And with that, we are adjourned. Good night, everybody.
Good night.